Good morning, students. Yesterday we had seen how the Roman Empire, once it ran out of the silver reserves, it started minting its currency coins in gold. Yes, so it is almost like what we have studied in French Revolution. That during the time the Queen is supposed to have said, Queen Marie Antoinette at that point in time supposedly said about the poor people of France who didn't have bread, that if they can't have bread, let them have cakes. So it was exactly the similar situation, that when the Roman Empire ran out of silver, it started minting gold coins. So that is, we were looking at the monetary policy. Now, coming to the second paragraph, the late Roman bureaucracy, both the higher and the middle echelon, echelon essentially means rank, the level or the rank. Uh, but this is a very very official kind of thing. Echelons we normally do not use in general English. Now, was a comparatively affluent group because it drew the bulk of its salary in gold and invested much of this in buying up assets like land. So it was a good thing. If you're being paid in gold, yes, land comes easy. So there was, of course, also a great deal of corruption, especially in the judicial system and in the administration of military supplies. Now, this is something students now, it is about human nature. These things are prevalent even today, in spite of all the great standard operating procedures which different countries and their governments keep coming up with all the time. But you cannot completely eradicate corruption from your ranks. So the extortion of the higher bureaucracy and the greed of the provincial governors was proverbial, but the government intervened repeatedly to curb these forms of corruption. We only know about them in the first place because of the laws that tried to put an end to them, and because historians and other members of the intelligentsia denounced such practices. Now, students, even after 2000 years, the story remains the same. We are human beings. We would like to remain corrupt, and we like corruption because we all want the finer things of life. We want to elevate our standard of living. We want to dabble in simple pleasures of life. That's human. So it is a continuous struggle, whether you talk about today or you talk about 2000 years ago. So the Roman side, this element of criticism is a remarkable feature of the classical world. The Roman state was an authoritarian regime. In other words, dissent was rarely tolerated, and government usually responded to protests with violence, especially in the cities of the East, where people were often fearless in making fun of emperors. Yet a strong tradition of Roman law had emerged by the 4th century AD, and this acted as a brake on even the most fearsome emperors. Emperors were not free to do whatever they liked, and the law was actively used to protect civil rights. So, students, like all the rulers at any point in time, the king was considered to be an absolute monarch, and the more absolute he was, the greater glory he was able to amass for himself, because he was then considered to be indispensable. Imagine someone objecting to the decisions of Genghis Khan or Temur or Attila the Hun or Julius Caesar, or they would be butchered right in there. So naturally, they used these. You were considered to be a great emperor, only when you were indispensable, and you were considered to be indispensable when everyone paid attention to whatever your desire is everyone's command. So, but what we are saying here is that yes, even under the fiercest of the rulers and the emperors of Rome, there was a tradition also of criticism, through theaters. You know, the bards used to sing. They were humorists. They were jokers who could actually criticize the ruler and the ruling class and the emperors in a lighter vein, and they would get off with it. People they were not that they were put behind bars for doing it, because there was a sense of tolerance as well. They were not these rulers were definitely very very strict and extremely temperamental, but then yes, many of them and most of them, here we are not only talking about a system of checks and balances, students, whereby the institutions of the state do not allow you to become a dictator. That is fine, that was there, that is been always there in all the empires and the kingdoms. Do you think Chandragupta Maurya or the Ashoka, they did not listen to their cabinet ministers? Of course, they had to listen to their cabinet ministers. Okay, they could not do things arbitrarily, everything on their own. They always had a system. Of course, the ultimate decision was always with the emperor. But then, what here we are saying is that in spite of all that, the system of checks and balance, we are not talking about that. We are talking about a tradition of tolerance which existed, which was outside the state machinery. People at the level of streets, people at the level of theater, people at the level of art, painting, even the church clergy, they used to have enormous amount of independence when they could and they could express themselves if they wanted to be critical of the senate or they want to be critical of the emperor himself. And that is where we continue, and that is why in the latter 4th century it was possible for powerful bishops like Ambrose to confront equally powerful emperors when they were excessively harsh or repressive in their handling of the civilian population. Now, students, this gentleman, Ambrose, why he is very famous is, because he was firstly bishop of one of the very prominent places of Christianity. That is, he was the bishop of Milan. Now, Milan, the Church of Milan, and the papacy, or the Church of Milan, rather. I'm sorry about the word using the word papacy, but the Church of Milan exactly was considered to be extremely influential, and it was indeed a very influential institution. And he was the bishop of the Church of Milan. And not just that, students, Ambrose, I remember very vividly because he is considered to be one of the doctors of Christianity. Bishop Ambrose is considered to be one of the doctors. Now, doctors here does not mean anything which has to do with the medical profession at all. Now, doctors of Christianity here, or the doctors of the church, exactly here, it means that someone who has made enormous amount of contribution to the science of faith. You know, the science of faith, the science and the study of Christianity. Someone who has made enormous amount of contribution in that. So, late antiquity. Now we shall conclude this chapter. So by looking at the cultural transformation of the Roman world in its final centuries. Late antiquity is the term now used to describe the final fascinating period in the evolution and breakup of the Roman Empire and refers broadly to the 4th to 7th century. The 4th century itself was one of considerable ferment, that is trouble, both cultural and economic. At the cultural level, the period saw a momentous development in religious life, with the Emperor Constantine deciding to make Christianity the official religion, and with the rise of Islam in the 7th century. But there were equally important changes in the structure of the state that began with the Emperor Diocletian, who ruled from 284 AD to 305 AD, and it may be best to start with these. Now, overexpansion had led Diocletian to cut back by abandoning territories with little strategic and economic value. Diocletian also fortified the frontiers, reorganized provincial boundaries, and separated civilian from military functions, granting greater autonomy to the military commanders, who now became much more powerful. Constantine consolidated some of these changes and added others of his own. So, before we come to Constantine, Diocletius, students, you have to understand. I have said this time and again. It is you know great empires get expanded because great emperors expand them. Emperors or the kings who are extremely good at military tactics, then they are extremely good administrators, very charismatic, and that these are the elements which, and very ruthless as well, and these are the elements which make them extremely powerful and almost give them an air of invincibility. But then when these rulers expand massive into massive geographies, right from east, west, north, south, and they keep expanding and bringing huge amount of territories into their fold, and add huge amount of territories into their empire. But then you have to understand that, of course, the resources of the empire can swell, and the huge amount of gold would be coming to the treasury, and then very, very talented people who suddenly become part of your empire, and of course, the empire really flourishes. But the problem here is this is a double edged sword. Under great emperors and kings, it is easy to, get the best out of all these territories that have been added, but the problem is, under a ruler who is even slightly weak, it just, the whole structure and the edifice falls like pack of cards, because he finds it extremely difficult to manage it. If under a weak ruler, this would not stand, this would not hold even for 3 or 4 or 5 months. Someone like Julius Caesar and those kind of Augustus, these kind of people, of course they can hold it, because they have so much of experience and charisma and everything behind them. But then another weak ruler, that is what Diocletian realized, that yes, he had to now grant, and he had to concede more powers to the provinces, because the provinces, they now know that the person sitting at the central authority is not as good and as not as strong as as his predecessor probably, and so this is the best time to negotiate the best deal for themselves. And this is what always has happened in all the empires in any part of the planet. The moment you have a weak ruler, like for example, Chandragupta was great, so was his son Bindusar, then so was his son Ashoka, but Ashoka's predecessors, they just could not hold that massive size of the territory and the rule which the Mauryan Empire had. And within 50, 60 years, everything was gone, right? Because the provincial rulers, the governors, everyone knew the same thing happened. The governors become more and more powerful, and the same thing happened with the Mughals. Till Aurangzeb, from Barbar till Aurangzeb, everything was, Mughal Empire was one of the greatest and the richest. But after Aurangzeb was gone, no one could hold a geography which was so massive, and like India, and people with so much of diversity, with all rajas and governors with their local ambitions. And by the time of Bahadur Shah Zafar, he was not even, no one used to listen to him even in the area around Delhi. So he was just a king of old Delhi, and that's it. Imagine, right from his great grandfathers and their grandfathers, which whose writ ran from the whole of Pakistan to Burma to Bangladesh to whole of India. Suddenly, no one listens to you even in New Delhi. So this is the problem. We shall continue. Thanks.